I recently started school again, and as a part of my daily routine, I am required to travel to Toronto Monday through Friday via the train and subway lines. It's a good 2 hours one way, so I usually pull out a good book, pop in my headphones, and relax to some music. I, of course, being from out of town, have heard a lot of horror stories that many people have endured on the subway. Naturally, I thought most of it was just exaggerations and tall tales. Well, I was very quickly proven dead wrong. About a week ago, I had just finished a very long and grueling day of school, and I wanted nothing more than to just get home and relax as soon as possible. I took my usual bus route to the subway station and sat down on one of the seats directly beside one of the exit doors. Now, a little context. I am facing forward, looking at one seat ahead of me, across the aisle of the subway car. This seat was occupied by a woman that looked to be in her 20s. She was what looked like playing a game on her phone, and was paying absolutely no attention to anything going on around her. Next to this seat opposite me is another seat that faces this lady on her phone, and it is this person in this seat that made my 40-minute subway ride very disturbing. Occupying this seat was another lady that looked to be about 40 years old and possessed a very creepy smile. I say this because she never stopped smiling. And I mean, she was smiling the entire subway ride. For the first half of the ride, she was staring at the younger lady on her phone, laughing and muttering to herself. She also would occasionally take her phone out of her purse and take pictures of the girl on her phone. About halfway to my destination, the younger girl that was on her phone left the subway car, and the smiling lady's attention was then directed at me. She turned to face me and gave me a huge, disturbing, toothy grin. I just stared at a poster on the roof of the train for what felt like hours. Eventually she got the hint that I was avoiding her gaze like the plague and went to plan B. She opened up her purse and removed a tube of toothpaste. She then proceeded to ingest at least half the tube. I damn near threw up, but somehow held it together, even though while she did this, she was still smiling at me, while laughing, now her face covered in toothpaste. My stop finally came, and I bolted from that subway car as fast as I could. I got to the escalator and glanced back to the car, and guess who I see walking fast towards me, arms held still at her side, still smiling. I was understandably completely terrified at this point. I ran out of the station into the bus. I made it onto the bus just as it pulled away from the station. I took one final look back, and there she was, standing on the platform, head cocked to the side, laughing and waving goodbye to me. For context, I am a 14-year-old, and 2 days ago, something very creepy and unnerving happened to me. I am on the cross-country team at my school, and our coach wants us to stay in shape during quarantine, so I was going on a run. I tend to run early in the morning, around 5:30 or 6, because the weather is cooler and less people are out and about. It's also nice to get your run over with so that the rest of the day is free. For you to understand exactly what happened, I need to explain the route that I run, so bear with me. I live in a nicer neighborhood in the US. My neighborhood is also near a major road. When I go on my run, I leave my neighborhood, travel down the main road, and enter a different neighborhood that is close to my own. This neighborhood has a low crime rate, is on the richer side, and goes along a big reservoir. It has lots of hills, and some of the bigger houses near the entrance of the neighborhood are backed up against some woods. I run through it because I like to look at the big houses, and sometimes some of the wildlife, such as deer, which sometimes makes its way out of the woods. When I run through it early in the morning, I get to enjoy the lack of people and the bird song. You need to understand that I run this route every morning, and no strange occurrences have happened with me being there. Now that you understand this setup, I'll tell you what happened. Like I said, this was 2 days ago. I left my house and neighborhood per usual, and ran along the major road to the entrance of the neighborhood that I usually run in. Almost as soon as I come across the first house on the street, one of the ones that is backed up against some woods, I hear a rustling in the bushes. I think, oh cool, it's probably one of the deer, and slow down to try to spot it. But it never came out of the bushes. So I pick up my pace and continue along. Not long after that, maybe 2 minutes later, I hear someone on a bike behind me. This isn't unusual, so I don't think much about it, until the guy on the bike says, beep beep. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe he doesn't have a bell or something, so I move over to the right to let the guy pass me on my left. But he doesn't. He stays right behind me. I'm not a slow runner, but someone on a bike would definitely be faster than me. If you have ever tried to go really slow on a bike, you will understand how hard it is to keep your balance. So I'm thinking, okay, this is really weird. I have a feeling that this guy is bad news, and I need to shake him. So I slow to a stop and get over to the side of the road to tie my shoe, which doesn't really need to be tied, and to see if he'll pass me. He doesn't. He just stopped. When it becomes clear that he isn't going anywhere, I get back on the sidewalk and keep running. Bad choice, I know, but I was panicking. Of course, the man on the bike follows, but even though my attempt to shake him didn't work, I did get a good look at him. He was tall and thin, with glasses, and he wore a Nirvana t-shirt. He definitely looked like a serial killer. As an avid reader of horror novels and an obsessive listener of scary podcasts, I was already thinking of the absolute worst possible outcome. I was going to be murdered when I had been out of my house for less than 10 minutes. Worse, I was over 2 miles from my house, so I was going to have to continue running. Now, I know that what I should have done was go to the closest house and let the family that lived in it know what was going on, but I wasn't thinking clearly. So I kept running, and the man on the bike kept following me at a meticulously slow pace. I was tired, sweaty, and near tears. I wanted to go home. Home was the only thing on my mind. I started looking around for ways to lose him or hide. Just up ahead of me was a sharp turn. My hope was that I could get around the turn faster than him, and then hide. Not a very well-developed plan, but better than being killed by a random person. I sprinted around the corner as fast as I could, right into a young woman who was out walking her 2 dogs. Big dogs. German shepherds, actually. I started to apologize profusely, trying to look calm. Apparently, I did not look calm at all, because she asked me what was wrong. The man was still behind me, practically breathing down my neck. I stared at the woman, pleading with my eyes, and said, "How is your walk going, Mom?" I prayed that she would understand, that she would play along. And fortunately for me, she did. She smiled at me and said, "Where were you? Me and your father were looking all over for you." We both then turned to look at the man on the bike, who looked extremely shocked. He turned around and quickly pedaled away, almost running into an oncoming car. As soon as he was gone, I broke down crying, telling the woman everything. She was very sympathetic and kind, and she ended up calling my parents to come pick me up. I was still sobbing when they arrived, and I had to catch my breath before telling them what happened. Looking back, I am almost positive that if I hadn't run into that woman, that something awful would have happened. I'm not sure if the rustling in the bushes at the entrance of the neighborhood was that man, or not, but I am completely content with never knowing. I have not been back to that neighborhood since, and I'm not sure if I ever will.
So back around 2013, my father had some property in upstate New York by Scroon Lake. It was a heavily forested area, and a part of the Scroon River ran between it. My dad had discovered a rocky beach by the river, and he decided one night to set up camp there. From what he's told me, it was a quiet night, where all you could hear were the crickets and the frogs from the nearby swamp. He was reading a book when he heard an unfamiliar noise. It was footsteps in the leaves. Naturally, he assumed that it was a white-tailed deer. They were pretty common in that area. He didn't think much of it, and he thought it was a cool experience to have one come so close to his campsite. But the footsteps kept getting closer. He was starting to get suspicious as to what exactly was walking near his campsite. The footsteps were now circling his tent, all the way from the shore to the tree line. All of a sudden, the footsteps started running towards my dad's tent. They crashed into the side of the tent at full force. My dad kicked and punched the person until they got up and ran back into the forest. He then packed up his gear and left shortly after. The next day, he found out that an ex-convict had been shot dead there by the cops just months prior. Apparently, the convict had been speeding, and he was caught by the highway patrol. He tried to hide in the hidden driveway that leads into the property. He ran and resisted until he tried to pull one of the troopers' guns from their belt and was shot dead. So that was the time that my dad was attacked by the ghost of an ex-convict. Pretty crazy story. I'll leave a link to a news article below. 8 years ago, when I was about 10, my family relocated to a small single-story house with the intention of renovating and flipping it. It was a heavily industrial-type area, and it wasn't originally designed to be a house. It was more of an office building. My parents converted the largest office into the master bedroom because it had a bathroom attached to it. My siblings shared another room on the outer perimeter of the house, and I got stuck with a smaller room towards the center, so there was no windows. When I first walked into the small isolated chamber I would be sleeping in, I immediately got the sense like I wasn't allowed in there. It was like I was breaking some kind of unspoken rule, and I couldn't shake it. I tried to distract myself by setting up my furniture and toys, trying my best to personalize the room and make it feel more welcoming. But the feeling just continued to strengthen. It was like I was vandalizing someone else's property. My door was open as I was finishing up, and at that moment I happened to be the only one in the house. I then heard the frantic scurrying of paws across the kitchen flooring up the hall. I'm sure most of you know the sound. I smiled and ran into the hall, because I assumed our dogs had arrived. The idea had been to keep them at our friend's place until we had a fence up in the backyard, but apparently the plans had changed. I caught the sight of a shadow figure, lurking in the corner, and then it disappeared toward the main entrance as I called out to my dog. Then the sound stopped, and at that point all I could hear was the tense silence. I looked all around, but my dog wasn't anywhere in sight. There hadn't been a sound of a door closing. I went outside and asked my parents where the dogs were, and they gave me a quick reminder that the dogs wouldn't be coming for another few days. My 10-year-old brain couldn't process what just happened, but instead of trying to explain what I had seen, I just kept quiet. I spent the night in my siblings' room, half convinced that there was an animal running loose somewhere in the house. Fast forward about 3 months, and the house was coming together nicely, and I was feeling much more comfortable in my bedroom. The strange, unwelcoming feeling had subsided, and I was actually enjoying my cavern of privacy. However, one night I woke up to the sound of whispering in my room. I sat up and paused, half convinced that I heard my own name being spoken from across the room. I then reached over and flipped on my light, but there was absolutely nothing there. I turned the light back off and settled back into bed, and I would have dismissed this altogether if not for what happened next. I heard my younger sister start screaming from her room. I followed my parents down the hall to her room, where she was literally shaking in fear. She said that someone was calling her name from near the window. She stated that someone had been taunting her, trying to get her to leave the room and head to the small pond in the backyard. She said that she had seen something looking at her through the window. My father turned on the porch light and went out back to put her mind at ease. He came back within a few minutes and said that he hadn't seen anything. A few years later, after we had long since moved out of that house, my father did confess that he had seen something out by the pond. It was an animal of some kind, and he assumed it was a bobcat. He got the feeling that he was in some kind of danger from it. He then made his way back inside. My sister then told me that she couldn't sleep for the rest of that night because she saw something with red eyes stalking around in the backyard through her window, coming into view every few minutes. Now here's where things start to get even stranger. The first two occurrences could be dismissed as imagination, paranoia, or nightmares, but even my parents began to feel uneasy after what happened next. Though they didn't show it at the time, it was in the middle of the day, and my sister and I were watching TV in the living room when we heard a thudding sound coming from across the roof. We collectively lost our minds because the footfalls were so heavy. We were convinced that a bear or something was trying to break in. We could hear the support beams in the ceiling straining under the weight. We hid behind the couch, which in retrospect was stupid. Heading down to the basement would have probably been safer if something was about to fall through our roof. When my parents got home, we didn't have to say anything because the footsteps hadn't stopped. My dad grabbed this rusty old pitchfork that he kept in the garage and went outside, ready to prod something down off the roof. He assumed that it was a dog of some kind. I should point out that our dogs weren't home that day, though I can't remember the exact reason. The only way up onto the roof was this dead tree alongside the opposite wall of the house, and my dad climbed up with no problem. But when he got to the roof, there was nothing there. Well, nothing except for a toy horse that I had lost the first week we moved in. There was also my sister's doll that she had brought home that day. And even when my dad stomped as hard as he could across the roof, he couldn't replicate the noise that we had all heard before. My parents had the tree cut down that weekend. There were a few instances where the TV would misbehave and turn off by itself during the night, but nothing of real concern to happen until that summer. The housework was finished, and we were all getting ready to move out, as a buyer had already been found. I was playing hide and seek with my sisters, and had chosen this chest in the back room as the best place to lay low. There were a whole bunch of coats and boots and random things in there, and when I climbed in and hid myself among the coats, I felt my leg bump against someone else. My younger sister seemed to have the same idea as me and was already hiding in there. I didn't want to give us away, so I didn't say anything, but instead I just carefully shut the lid. There was just enough room for the both of us. I'm not sure how long we were in there for, but I heard my older sister walking through the room looking for us a couple of times, and after a few minutes of silence, I poked my head up through the coats and cracked the lid of the chest to get some air. Through the door to the next room, I could see my sisters looking around the family room for me. Both of my sisters. I screamed and shot up so fast that I smacked my head against the chest lid and I made to scramble out of there. And that's when something grabbed my leg. It wasn't a firm grab, but it was more of a confirmation, like something was trying to say,
"I was here the whole time."
The whole chest fell forward, and I scrambled out, wailing like a siren and bawling my eyes out. When my sister saw me, they began panicking, asking why I was so bruised up. I went to the bathroom and discovered that I had scratches and bruises all up and down my arms, legs, and neck. They weren't so bad that I was bleeding or anything, but I did look like I had let someone poke at me with thumbtacks for a while. My parents were convinced that my sisters had attacked me, even after I told them that I had been in the trunk. We moved away that summer. Looking back, it's funny how quickly abnormal things like that become totally irrelevant when you get a change of scenery. Life goes on. My family and I still remember those events, but rarely ever speak of them. Not because we're afraid. It's because we don't really see much point to it. I wonder if that's how most people adapt after experiencing something they could never explain. Dismissive and indifferent. Like it may as well have never happened.
I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So like a routine camping trip, we canoed out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor Mike take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts, and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30-ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed, and me and Mike are talking by the water smoking a cigarette, just basically hanging out, before we decide to head into our tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that was trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly, terrified, I responded by telling her that they were fine and that she had to leave. "That's good. Just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mystery woman who resembled a corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the kids that we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later, across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text, which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop messing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know that I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie and that I was not trying to play a joke on her. Apparently, one of her kids had opened their tent door to go to the bathroom and saw a woman with long gray hair standing a few feet away with her arms outstretched towards them. A few years ago, I lived in my car. I was fresh out of college and overwhelmed with student debt, and being young, dumb, and 21, I thought car living was a good way to save money. I live in Southern California, so the rent is high and the weather is temperate enough to make this possible year-round. One night, I decided to park in a neighborhood I thought I knew well. It was right by the beach and a couple blocks next to an ex-boyfriend of mine, so I felt safe there, as I had walked the streets at night plenty of times. I parked, locked the doors, hung up the curtains so no one could look in, plugged in my earplugs so the cars passing wouldn't wake me, and fell asleep. Now my earplugs were effective, but crappy, and I could always count on them falling off in the middle of the night. I actually preferred this because it meant I could fall asleep, but still hear my phone alarm in the morning. It was about 2 a.m. when I woke up to my earplugs already have fallen off, and something feeling wrong. Odd scratching noises were coming from the window. It started at the passenger side door and then moved to the back seat doors. I froze, unsure of what to make of it, painfully aware that I leave my windows slightly cracked at night for ventilation. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I stayed frozen, trying to make sense of it all. That's when the flashlight turned on, and some man unmistakably was shining his light in, trying to find a crack in the curtains, and to my horror, he found one and shined it right where my face was. It's hard to explain, but the position of my head made it so I could piece together what was happening, based on the light everywhere, but he couldn't see my eyes. The scratching then continued, and I knew I was screwed. This went from potential attempted car theft to someone knowing I was in the car. I was literally paralyzed with fear and couldn't will myself to grab the baseball bat that I had. However, my last year of college, I took a class called RAD, which stood for Rape, Aggression, Defense, and remembered the number one rule: yell confidently and confrontationally at the man. I wish I could say I screamed something truly bad, but what left my lips was a loud, aggravated, and forceful, "Excuse me." It was super lame, but it echoed. To my immense relief, I hear the sounds of his footsteps running away at top speed. But I kid you not, the man was laughing as he ran like it was some kind of game. I was still paralyzed, but eventually, him running gave me the courage to get up, grab my bat, and shove my way to the front seat, where I started the car and sped away. I didn't see him, and I spent the night at a friend's house. I live in an apartment now. It wasn't until the next morning I realized I had parked 1 block away from a bar, and, at the time of the incident, the bar had just closed. When I was 12, I remember one Friday night, and there's no way that I could ever forget it. My older brother and I were picking up snacks and drinks at a little convenience store for a party that we were holding that night. My brother had me wait in the car while he ran inside to get the chips and whatnot. This happened in the 90s, so cell phones were not really a thing yet, especially for a 12-year-old. I remember abruptly looking up and seeing a man's face peering into the window inches from mine. He had glasses on and looked intelligent, but creepy. He smiled, and it was obvious right then that there was something very off about him. I could tell instantly that his intentions were not good. He said hello, and then asked my name. I gave him a false name, and then he said that his name was John. I gave a nervous and forced smile, and it became increasingly awkward. I looked past the man, hoping to see my brother walking over to the car, but I was filled with disappointment. He was still inside the store. The man, or John, as he said his name was, then asked me if I lived nearby. This was such a red flag that I was almost speechless and just replied, "Not really." He kept a very creepy smile the entire time. I looked over his shoulder again and thankfully saw my brother walking towards the car. Just then, John tried opening the door. Thank the Lord it was locked. I don't remember locking it, but you can bet your ass that I was glad that it somehow was locked. I didn't have time to react, and John immediately walked away after the door didn't budge. My brother walked up seconds later and asked who the hell that was. I was shaking and told him that I had no idea. Nothing else happened that night, and the party was great, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think that this guy was trying to kidnap me. However, about 2 years later, I saw the guy on the news. He was captured and sentenced to death for murdering 3 teenage boys. Sound unbelievable? Trust me, I have trouble believing it myself. 30 years. I'm from Belfast, Ireland. I have a large friend group, and we would always have sleepovers at my house. This is the story of how one campout in my back garden went wrong. I live in a nice neighborhood, mostly with old people in it. It was around Easter, and in my school, we get a week and a half off for Easter break. Just before school ended, we decided to have a campout in my back garden because I recently got a new tent that could fit probably my whole friend group into it. It was the Saturday after we finished, and we all met up at my house around 7 o'clock. We ordered pizza, made marshmallows around the fire, and all in all, we had fun. At around 12:30 a.m., we all decided to crawl into the tent and play some card games, as it was getting quite cold outside. I dealt all 13 decks, and we began a game of Jack Change It. After around 5 different card games, we all ordered some food and climbed into bed to wait for the food to arrive. We got a text message saying that it would be there in around 40 minutes, so we all could relax for a while. The food came, and we all went outside to sit around the fire and eat it. I have a large back garden, and we were at the bottom of it, so we weren't afraid of waking my parents up by singing and talking loudly. After finishing our food, we got back into the tent and decided to get some rest. When everyone had drifted off to sleep, I was awoken by a strange sound. A sort of whistling sound. I brushed it off as being me dreaming, but around 2 minutes later, there it was again. Every 2 minutes it happened. I woke up my friend and told her to listen. Right after I said that, there was a different kind of whistle, and it came from the other side of the tent. This was when we decided to wake everyone else up. After around 10 minutes of listening to the whistling going back and forth, we heard footsteps coming from behind the tent. The crunching of leaves made us all fall still. We counted to 3 and broke out of the tent sprinting. All of us ran as fast as we could to the back door. Once we were all in, we locked it and looked out the window. We could just barely make out 3 people standing in the garden, looking up at us.
This happened when I was 23. I am a small female, and this story has changed my life. It was almost midnight when I got off of work at my job as a chef. The town that my restaurant was in always bustled with activity. The bars and diners were always packed. I climbed into my dented-up Ford Taurus and turned the key. Immediately, I cursed myself for not getting gas on my way to work. There was no way I was going to make it home on less than a quarter of a tank. Irritated, I pulled out of my spot and onto the parkway, driving towards a popular chain gas station. When I pulled up to fill my tank, there was an eerie silence that hung over the gas station. I was the only customer there, which felt strange. I popped open my tank and started pumping fuel, annoyed that it was taking so long. Another car pulled up and parked at the pump right next to mine. It was an odd choice, since there were at least 8 unoccupied others to choose from. Turning away from the car, I finished fueling and closed the door to my tank. There was a cheesy song blaring over the speakers, so I didn't realize that a man had walked up behind me. I turned around and was startled. I then took a few steps back. The man smiled. He wasn't much older than me. "Can I help you?" I asked. He was standing in front of my driver's side door, blocking me from climbing inside. At first, he just looked at me and said, "Pretty thing like you shouldn't have to pump gas by herself. You should get your man to do that for you." My blood ran cold. He knew that I was alone. My car windows weren't tinted, so it was obvious that no one was with me. "Out here so late all on your own?" he went on, dragging his finger over my door handle. I tried to not let him see that I was terrified and kept his eye contact. "My husband is at home, and he's waiting for me to get back from work. It was nice to meet you. You have yourself a good night." I bluffed, taking a step closer to the man, indicating that I was ready to get back into my car. "Sure, honey." As soon as he took a step back, I lunged into my driver's seat, shutting the door and locking it behind me. The doors to the man's car opened, and 4 other men climbed out, and my entire body started to go into shock. I realized that they may try to kidnap me. The first man pounded on the hood of my car as his friends started trying all of my door handles. Fear came over me as I grabbed my phone to call the police. However, all I saw was a connect charger message flash on my screen as the phone shut down. "Oh no! Oh my God, no!" I screamed. "Just leave. Just whip out of here and lose them," I thought to myself. I turned my engine over, and that's when the men surrounded my car, trying to use their bodies to block me from driving away.
"Bitch, get out of your car!"
One of them screamed before punching my window.
"We're not gonna hurt you."
Like I would believe that. I took a deep breath and put my car in drive. I didn't want to have to run over someone with my car, but if I absolutely had to, I would. I inched forward, and the men tried to call my bluff by not moving. "Looks like this is going to be a game of chicken," I said to myself. I then moved my car forward even more, until they all scattered and climbed into their car. I took the opportunity and screeched out onto the parkway, almost getting T-boned in the process. I didn't know what to do. They had pulled up behind me and were now following me. If I drove home, they would know where I lived, and I had no idea where the police station was. I had a tank full of gas, so I decided that I would just drive until I lost them. I was too afraid to pull over at a business and try and seek help, and I couldn't outrun their car. So I did something that my dad would have yelled at me for. I decided to drive towards the woods, out to my grandmother's place. She lived in the middle of nowhere, and I knew of a few back roads I could take to try and shake them. So the chase began, them trying to run me off the road and tailgating me so close that I swear I heard our bumpers touching. Blood was rushing through me so fast that I was afraid that my eyes would actually burst out of my head. We made it to the windy road that led to my grandma's. If you aren't familiar with this road, it can be lethal, and that's what I was counting on. Them not knowing every twist and turn by heart like I did should slow them down. The speed limit was 35 and drops down to 20 when you're going around turns. There wasn't a single chevron in sight to guide these stalkers around the turns. I pushed the gas and brought my car up to 65, which was the maximum speed you could go driving down this road. I took each of the sharp turns furiously, constantly keeping an eye on my rearview mirror. I was gaining quite a bit of ground on them, and noticed that at numerous times they almost went off-road. I wasn't even using my brakes, for fear that the lights would warn them of each turn. I was afraid that I would actually die in a wreck, but anything was better than what these men had in store for me. I finally came to the one-lane bridge, cutting off a car coming from the opposite direction. This forced my pursuers to stop, as the other car came between us, making its way down the bridge. This was it. It was my opportunity to completely get rid of them. I drove down a long gravel driveway and killed my lights, pulling my car beside a parked pickup truck. I held my breath as I waited. A moment later, the car that was following me sped by. I counted to 10 and pulled up to the mouth of the driveway, watching their taillights vanish around a turn. I punched it and sped back the way I came from. I almost wrecked at one point for not keeping my eyes on the road. Finally, I lost them. I made it home around 2 in the morning. I pulled my car into the garage and locked all of my doors. Remember to always have your phone charger in your car. You never know when you may need to call the police. This happened to me back in the summer of 2018. Just thinking about it now still gives me chills to this day when I consider what could have happened to me that night. I'll start by giving a little backstory. I'm a 24-year-old male who lives in Minnesota. I was staying with a friend who lives in Chicago. We've been friends since sophomore year in college, so I was really looking forward to catching up with him since our departure after graduation. I was only visiting him for a week, and then I would be on my way home. During the evening, my friend, who we'll call Steven, and his mother went out to go get food, and I decided to stay behind for the simple fact that I just wanted to get settled in for the night. However, the house became extremely hot, so that's when I decided to get out of the house and go walk around the neighborhood. Now, something that you should know about me at this point is that I'm a frequent walker, especially at night. It really calms my nerves whenever I'm on edge, or when I just need to get away for a while. I'm a really antisocial guy in a way. After about 10 minutes of walking, I came across the neighborhood park, and just to kill some time, I decided to go explore it. This park was massive. There was a baseball field enclosed by a walking trail that went on for about a mile, and there was also a small basketball court. In the distance, I could also see a small playground area for children, along with a dimly lit bathroom that you would typically see at any community park. The creepiest part was the trees that surrounded the area. Even though it was a park, it kind of put you in the state of mind that you were standing in the middle of a forest preserve. I didn't have any fears about walking around this park at night, because Steven always assured me that his neighborhood was safe for the most part. "Nothing ever happens here," he would always say. But he was mistaken. I decided to keep walking, and I eventually came across a small park bench, so I decided to sit down and enjoy the night breeze for a little bit. I was at peace when I suddenly heard a rustling noise coming from the nearby trees. I quickly turned around, and there was nothing there. Might have been the wind, a bird, or maybe a squirrel, I thought. After about 5 minutes of relaxing, I pull out my phone to see a text from Steven. It read, "Hey, we just got back. Where are you?" I was about to respond when I looked up to see a car pull in near the playground a few yards away from where I was sitting. This was pretty odd, seeing how it was about 9:30 p.m. But I didn't know much about this area, so I dismissed it as being completely normal. A few minutes go by, and I thought that someone would exit the car, but they didn't. It was at this point that I started to feel a little on edge. The headlights were irritating me, so I got up and started walking back to Steven's house. I texted him saying, "I'm on my way back from the park." In that moment, I heard a car door slam behind me, and I looked back to see a very large man. He was standing in front of his car, and it looked like he was staring right at me. Now keep in mind, it was pretty dark at this point, so I can't really describe any of his facial features. I began walking again, picking up my pace and looking behind me every few seconds. The man was now following me, and I was growing paranoid. I don't want to die tonight, I thought to myself. Suddenly I noticed out of the corner of my eye, 2 men emerged from the trees in the darkness. I was almost at the entrance of the playground when I heard, "Hey sexy, come here a minute. You want to have some fun tonight?" I was scared shitless at this point. Adrenaline started to kick in, and to this day, I still believe I did one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I turned around to face the men head on and yelled, "Fuck off, I'm not in the mood for games tonight." At that moment, a large hand covered my mouth from behind, and it was suddenly harder to breathe. I tried to scream, but the gloved hands just held me tighter. I started to feel lightheaded, and everything turned blurry. I then blacked out. I woke up in a car, still feeling lightheaded. My hands were tied, and my belt was unbuckled. I immediately noticed that all 4 of the car seats had men in them, and I was sandwiched between 2 of them in the back seat. "What's going on?" I said in a hoarse voice. "We're going for a ride," the driver said. I felt weak and sluggish as I desperately tried to move my body, but a sharp blow to the side from one of the men sitting beside me stopped me in my tracks. There was no way I could fight 4 guys bigger than me. I started begging for them to let me go, and they responded by just laughing at me. Tears ran down my face as I struggled to get my hands free, but it was useless. I felt nothing but fear and anger and overall embarrassment. The car started to back out of the parking lot, when suddenly there was the sound of the back window glass breaking. 3 of the men immediately got out of the car to check it out. "What the hell just happened?" one of them yelled. "You sickos let him go now!" I recognized the second voice as Steven. With the car doors open, I took the opportunity to escape, desperately stumbling onto the pavement. I looked up to see Steven holding a rock in one hand and a tree branch in the other. "I already called the police on you fuckers," he said. I started to gather my strength and joined my friend in the standoff. We were outnumbered, but I wasn't going to let him fight these men on his own. He was like a brother to me, and where I come from, you protect your family. In the distance, we heard the sound of sirens. The men quickly hopped back in the vehicle and booked it out of there fast. I immediately noticed the car didn't have any license plate. I'll skip through the police details, because it was just the usual. They took my statement and told me that they would let me know if anything happens. The week passed without further incident. The day that I was getting ready to go back to Minnesota, I was trying to block out everything that happened as best as I could, when Steven said, "You could have been Michael." "Who's Michael?" I asked. He then told me that when he was in middle school, he had a friend named Michael. They used to play together all the time at that playground. One day a stranger approached them. The man claimed to be a friend of Michael's dad. To make a long story short, he never saw that man or his friend Michael ever again.
This encounter happened to me while attending college at Auburn University in Alabama. It was the hectic part of the fall school semester when students are busy preparing for final exams. I was no exception to the rule. One of the nice things about Auburn University, which is not uncommon to many other colleges, is that the library remains open 24 hours a day during final exams. As you can imagine, such an open invitation draws in a large crowd. Students occupy all the available space on several floors with books and ideas. On this particular night, at least one of them was not a student. Let me explain. I arrived at the library early in the afternoon, navigated my way to the third floor, and quickly located a desk for intense concentration. Hours passed as I put my attention on the pages of my organic chemistry textbook. It became dark outside. I was extremely happy with my progress. I celebrated with a sandwich, chips, and a few beers. At just past 11 o'clock, nature called. I entered the bathroom and made my way to the stall furthest from the entrance. A few minutes passed, and then another person entered. Here is where things turned creepy. We are two, and we are alone. For what seemed like an eternity, I only heard silence. No toilet flushing, no feet shuffling, no hand washing, absolutely nothing. Then, he locked the door. At this point, my mind was racing. Was I about to be robbed? Random act of violence? A joke? I tried to stay calm as he walked over to the stall that I occupied. Eventually, he broke the silence with an offer I will never forget. He offered me a Happy Meal. I kindly but firmly rejected, and thankfully, he exited the bathroom. I quickly finished my business, washed my hands, and left in a hurry. The exchange had me absolutely spooked. Study time was over. On my way out of the library, I spotted him. Our eyes locked briefly, and then I turned away. I could feel his stare. All that I remember about him is that he was a middle-aged man wearing makeup and a McDonald's uniform. I haven't eaten McDonald's since.
Tickets for my favorite group were going on sale. Getting tickets for them is hell, and having a good laptop and Wi-Fi was key to up your chances on snatching a good seat. My university's Wi-Fi was complete ass, so I decided I would go around to various fast food places and test their Wi-Fi to see which one was the best. This wasn't too hard to do, since my university was walking distance from an abundance of various restaurants and fast food places, plus more food places that were a few minutes away by car or bus. One of the places I decided to test was McDonald's, which was only a 5-minute drive away from my university. I had my boyfriend take me, and we went inside and set up my laptop, iPad, and iPhone. We ordered something to snack on as well, because you can't pass up the opportunity of McDonald's fries if you are in McDonald's. In front of our table was a group of old guys who looked around the age where death would be knocking on their door soon. Me and my boyfriend were busy checking the Wi-Fi speed and conversing and giggling when one of the old guys stood up and decided to jokingly make a comment along the lines about how we should be doing our homework on a weekend and how teenagers were always working or on their phones. I don't exactly remember the wording he used, but it was along those lines. We both just awkwardly chuckled, and then we went back to what we were doing and tried to look busy. Apparently, old people don't care if you are busy or whatever, because he kept making jokes and speaking to us and telling us to stop working, etc. Notably, the majority of his remarks and conversation were directed towards just me and not to my boyfriend. Now, I was already kind of nervous because people randomly talking to me makes me a little antsy, especially ones who keep rambling after I make it clear I don't want to talk anymore. But him being an older man added to my nervousness even more due to how creepy and predatory they can sometimes be. He started asking questions that were more personal, like where did I go to school, how old I was, and whatnot. I was getting uncomfortable at this point, but answered his questions and told him the college I attended and how old I was. Looking back now, I don't think me telling him the truth about it was that harmful. He probably forgot them as soon as I told him. He also started complimenting me, then saying how pretty I was. All the while he was doing this, the other old men were either laughing or telling him to leave the poor girl alone. He started to make comments on me and my boyfriend's relationship as well, saying how cute we looked, it was nice to see young couples and how long we'd been with each other, etc. After we answered, he laughed and said,
"Well, if you ever get tired of him and want to look for someone else, I'm always available. You can kill me and get some money."
I was 100% uncomfortable at this point and just laughed along nervously while scooching closer to my boyfriend. I don't think he was serious though, and was just trying to joke around with us to seem likable or cool. But him even suggesting that was creepy and uncalled for. He finally left us alone after all the chuckles to himself and went back to talking amongst the old men. After a few minutes, I asked my boyfriend if he could grab us some things from the car because I wasn't feeling too good due to reasons. As soon as he left, the old guy and his friends got up too, and I hoped they would just walk out and pass by my table without saying a word. But apparently I have bad luck, so instead some of the old men talking to me stopped right and stood by me. He saw my university ID card and picked it up, making remarks of how good I looked in the picture and how I looked even prettier in person, and just kept looking me up and down. His friends chuckled and told him to leave the poor girl alone again, and I hope he would clean the wax out of his ears and listen to leave me alone. He just laughed and placed his hand on my shoulder, giving it a light squeeze while exclaiming,
"No, I won't leave her alone. She's too cute."
At this point, I was way past uncomfortable. I knew nothing deadly was going to happen to me because we were in a public place, even if the McDonald's was empty, so I knew they weren't going to kidnap me or anything, but I was still severely creeped out. I was screaming in my head for my boyfriend to hurry the fuck back in here so they would leave, because I didn't know what to do besides nervously laugh. They lingered for a little while the old guy looked at my ID card one more time before putting it back on the table and squeezing my shoulder again. He finally left after telling me to have a good day. A few seconds later, my boyfriend returned, and I was sitting there trying to relax and calm my nerves. I might be overreacting at getting so nervous, because the threat of me being taken or hurt was most likely next to none. But old men hitting on young girls just severely creeped me out beyond words.
This happened a couple of years ago. I was a freshman in college, my second semester. I was kind of a loner, if I'm going to be honest with you. Still am. At the time, I had a small YouTube channel here where I made enough money that I didn't have to work a regular job. Most college students had to work fast food or whatever, and I was fortunate enough to not be one of them. Don't get me wrong. I was poor and still lived with my parents, but I made enough online that I was comfortable enough. I remember my schedule was pretty hectic this second semester. I had a really long day on Friday. Every Friday, my first class was at 7 a.m., and my last class of the day was at 4 p.m. There were a couple of hours between classes throughout the day, and I think I had about 4 in total. I lived too far from college to be able to justify driving back home, so I just kind of had to wait around on campus all day long. It was only about 4 weeks into the semester when I was really tired of this routine already. I seriously thought about dropping one of the classes, but I figured that it was going to be worth it if I could graduate when I planned to. At the end of this particular Friday, I was starving. I didn't like to eat anything on campus because I didn't really trust the staff. I know that might be bad to say, but there was this one time that I ordered food from the cafeteria on campus and got food poisoning. They're a little infamous on campus, and there are a few people that regularly eat there. Understandably so. I just found myself waiting until I got out of class to eat. And then I can eat somewhere that I actually wanted to. I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to eat after class, and I just settled on grabbing some McDonald's on the way. I was originally planning on picking up some at the drive-thru, but I also had to really go to the bathroom by the time I got there. I just figured it would be easier to go in and order inside. I always found it difficult to order at the drive-thru anyway. I had a hard time understanding what people were saying through the microphone, so I got in there, ordered my food, and I was good to go. I was just going to bring it into my car and eat as I drove home, but I noticed something weird going on. Right outside of the McDonald's, two people were having an argument. They looked like they were around my age, probably late high schoolers or college students themselves. I stood there for a moment watching to see if the argument between these two people escalated, and it did. The man started holding the girl's arms down and pinned her against the car. I was assuming it was one of their cars. I wasn't sure if they were together or what the situation really was. I didn't really want to intervene because it was somebody else's drama and not really my problem, but I got more and more anxious about the girl's safety. This guy was a lot bigger than her. He at least had a foot of height, and he looked like he was an athlete. I stood there for a few more minutes watching to see what was going to happen. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but I understood that this situation was getting worse. It eventually got to the point when he opened the car door and threw her inside. I mean, literally pushed her and flung her inside the car. She didn't scream or anything, but it looked very startling. Made me jump a little bit, and then he went inside the car too. They were in the back seat, and I immediately got suspicious when he closed the car door behind him. I heard the girl start screaming from inside the car and immediately knew that I had to do something. I put my McDonald's food down on the sidewalk and then ran over to the car. I opened the car door, and he was very obviously surprised that I had done so. I saw that he was about halfway through taking off his belt. I punched him in the back, and this antagonized him. He struggled to get out of the car so that he could fight me. Thankfully, there were a few other people who had gotten involved before me and him had a go at it. There were two older men in their 40s who happened to be walking into the McDonald's that turned around and came over to help. When the other people started getting involved, he got anxious and just got in his car and drove away. I asked the girl what had happened. She told me that she didn't know that guy and he was just some random freak that wanted to use her. She claimed that he asked her to do it, but when she declined, he started getting confrontational about it, and I guess that was when I had noticed what was going on. This guy wasn't very smart. We were eventually able to identify him, and he was eventually charged with assault. The situation could very easily have been bad. If I hadn't intervened, he may have been able to do God knows what to this poor girl. It's crazy to think that such a horrible crime was almost committed in such a public place. I mean, people are always at McDonald's. The thought that someone could even attempt such a violent and repulsive act in public like that blows my mind. The girl thanked me profusely as I had just saved her a lot of physical and psychological torment. I told her that I didn't do anything special and that I was just trying to do the right thing.
This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. One night, I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I awoke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way up, and a few seconds later, Steam was rising, and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw that the knife was missing and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we had gotten in a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he would surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed, and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight, and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed. It was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened, just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door, and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom? His sister? The landlady? For some reason I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might have come over unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move. I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart, looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment, but doesn't touch or take anything valuable. Not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do. I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up, and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there, with a clipboard, and he said that he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt, with bold stripes, like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were, and walked into the open door of my room. The typical girly room with pink and glitter. Thankfully, my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here, and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that? I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s, and obviously we weren't going back into the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then, my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meter upstairs." And just like she had hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very nice. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried that she would be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found the door open, and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out, we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad that we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say that she had been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man. But fear not, he was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s. So in any case, he has to be dead by now. I'm just so thankful every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action.
As a half Navajo and Hopi, I've had my share of experiences on and off the Navajo and Hopi reservation. I hope that I won't get any ridicule from other Native Americans for posting these stories. One experience that I'd like to share happened when I was 14 years old. I'm now 29, so you can do the math. This is an experience that I've only shared with a small number of people, and that I'm now writing down for the very first time. My brother, who's now a hardened soldier, is still scared about what happened to us this particular evening. Anyway, on with the story. As a teenager, I'd visit my grandma at her home on the Navajo res for several weeks every summer. I loved to spend time with her, eat her delicious fried bread, and hear all of her stories. Every so often, my grandma would hire a worker to do odd jobs around her house and property. It was usually the harmless town drunk that she'd hire. One evening, right before the sun went down, I was asked by my grandma to take him home, which was about 4 miles out of the valley. Seeing that I was only 14 years old and being asked to drive a truck, I was more than happy to. Mind you, that on the res, nobody really cares that you're only 14 years old and driving around. Hell, there's hardly anybody out there to see you anyway. My 9-year-old brother jumped in the truck cab with me, while this worker and my dog shared the tailgate of the truck. After I dropped the worker off at the shack that he and his brother called a house, we headed back down the road to Grandma's. As I mentioned before, it was evening, and the sky was a deep red as the sun began to set behind us. We were leaving a nice dust trail from the dirt road, and the radio was playing music from the only station that could be picked up from the nearest town of Holbrook, Arizona. There was nothing unusual, nothing weird. It was at this time that my eye caught movement of something in the bushes a little up the road to the right of us. I remember slowing down, thinking that it was one of the many free-roaming sheep in the area that would dart out in front of the truck. As I passed where I thought I saw it, I sped up, thinking nothing else of it. Then, out of nowhere, I just felt this dark feeling of fear and dread. I had no idea why I was feeling this way, but I definitely felt that something was wrong. As I play this memory back in my mind, there are only a few clear memories that I have of that evening. I clearly remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing the dark silhouette of something very tall and very skinny that seemed to be covered with some kind of hair or fur running behind the truck after us. Whatever it wasn't a normal human, or even human at all. I remember hearing my brother crying and my dog barking ferociously at whatever was chasing us. I remember speeding very fast and shaking violently as the truck bounced on the washboard dirt road. I distinctly remember that this thing was getting closer as my brother cried, "It's coming up on your side." I remember being scared as hell and thinking that I didn't want to die. At the moment that I thought would be our last, I remember speeding around a bend in the road and seeing a car coming towards us in the opposite direction. At that moment, I felt instant relief and thought that whatever was following us was gone. Shaken up but still alive, we made it to my grandma's house, wondering what the hell had just happened. We ran inside, not looking back, hoping that whatever was chasing us hadn't followed us home. As we told my grandma about our experience, she didn't seem too surprised, which in turn surprised us. She continued by repeating stories that we had already heard at one point or another, talking about black magic, witches, and something that the Navajos call Yi-Nadlushi, skinwalkers. Without going too deep into explanation, I'll just say that these skinwalkers are evil men and spirits that use black magic for evil doing. One can only become a skinwalker by killing a close friend or a relative, and us Navajo don't like to talk about them because it's believed that once you acknowledge them, they'll find you. I tell you that as far-fetched as it sounds, they are real. I believe that if God and his greatness are real, the devil is equally as real, and also has his way of showing himself. Needless to say, I didn't even want to look out of any of the windows for the rest of that night. As a matter of fact, I never drove on the reservation at night again until I was 21 years old. This may not sound particularly scary to some, but what happened that evening really did happen, and scared the living crap out of me. I invite anybody to visit this part of Arizona if you have any doubts, or want a huge scare. I promise you that you won't be disappointed. This is my parents' story, and it took place in Colorado many years ago, back before I was even born. They're both natives, and have always been a very superstitious pair. That might just have saved their lives that night. They were traveling along $1 Million Highway through Red Mountain Pass after a long road trip. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and my dad was behind the wheel, while my mum slept in the passenger seat. They both knew the road well, and Dad was driving cautiously. The road is notoriously dangerous for its lack of guardrails and sheer steep drops over the edge. At one point, Dad nudges my mum awake. There's something not quite right about the road up ahead. After letting her eyes adjust for a moment, she too could see that the road ahead was different than usual. After having driven that road so many times, they both knew that the sharp left curve they were fast approaching was going the opposite way it should have been. This part of the road was meant to curve right around the mountain. Always had, always would. Even the sign they just passed said so. Neither of them knew what to say as they approached the bend in the road. They both rubbed their eyes, but they're not seeing things. The road really is turning left, not right. But that was impossible. The silence was killing them, and as they reached the point of no return, Mum screamed to turn right instead. She needn't have bothered, as Dad was already spinning the wheel in that direction, knowing that was how the road was supposed to go. As he turned, the actual road seemed to appear before them, just how it had always been. The road that turned left was now just gone, as if it had never been there to begin with, and all that was left in its place was a sheer drop. Had they followed the illusionary road they both saw, they would have plunged over the side of the mountain. Dad maintains that this was some sort of trickster trying to force them off the side of the cliff and into an early grave.
One day like any other, I was sitting in my room doing whatever when I got a notification from Instagram that I got a new follower. It seemed to be one of those random spam-like accounts. The username was Ty13053. and there were 5 pictures on the profile, all of different typical suburban houses. The profile had 2 followers, was following 3 people including me, and none of the pictures had any likes. Comments seemed to be disabled on all of the pictures. I didn't bother blocking or removing the account from my followers, as I had my profile set to public anyway at the time. A couple nights later, I got a notification that the random Ty13053 account liked my most recent picture. Just being curious, I click on the notification and then pull up the profile again. This time there was a new picture on the profile, and I instantly recognized it as a picture of my house. I DM'd the profile asking who it was, saying it was very funny. Of course, it had to be one of my friends messing with me. When the person running the account left my DMs unseen and didn't reply, I followed up with, "This is harassment and a threat," and that I would have the police follow up on this. I ran to my parents' room to wake them up, as it was past 12 at that point. I showed them the picture of our house, and said someone was messing with me who knew where we lived. They tried to rationalize, and said the same thing I thought, that it was someone from my school messing with me. My dad and I both went outside regardless to have a look around the property and on the street. It was a ghost town out there though, as it should be past 12 o'clock. We went back inside into our respective bedrooms. I wasn't actually going to pursue it with the police at that exact moment. It was obvious to me, at least in the moment, that someone who knew me was pranking me. I stayed up for a few more hours, and around the time I was about to go to bed, I got a DM from the account. It was an image, another image of my house. It was on the side this time. As I had the chat opened, he sent another, this time a picture of my window, with the glare from the TV in my room visible in the picture. I didn't dare get up and look out the window. Wouldn't you guess it, the next DM from the account was, "Look out your window." I turned off the TV to allow total darkness in the room. I didn't want to be seen by whoever was at my window. I quietly crawled off my bed onto the floor in the dark. As I was crawling on the carpet towards the door, a pounding on the window started. I don't want to say knocking, because these bangs on the glass sounded loud enough to shatter it. Inevitably, I turned, and of course, saw a person at the window. Facial features, though, impossible to make out. I got up and ran out of my room and to my parents' room once again. I pulled my dad out of the bed and led him to my room. He heard the end of the bangs on my window, but by the time we got to my room, the guy at the window was gone. The banging was all my dad needed to believe me and take this seriously, though. We called the cops that second and talked to the officers who came. They said the good news was since the person was contacting me through Instagram, they could track the person after putting a legal request into Instagram. So that same night, we followed the cop car to the nearest precinct, where we went through this long process. They took the account name and my details of the story, and literally the next day, we found out who it was. It was this kid named Luke who went to my high school. As much as I want to give the last name, that could lead to issues. Luke was a very, very weird kid that didn't talk to many people. He was just a very mean, unpleasant, and scary dude. Not scary like tough. Scary like some would even fear he'd do something crazy that would harm students or staff. I don't know why he targeted me. I never even spoke to the kid. But this really proved how dangerous he was. He hit my window so hard we found small cracks on it in the daylight. He was arrested and we got him for a harassment charge, an attempted breaking and entering charge, and I think a couple others. One day in calculus class, my friend Joe and I were goofing off in the corner when someone on Instagram requested to follow me. It was some blonde girl named Tracy. I accepted her follow request and showed Joe, because based on her picture, she was pretty hot. Of course, I felt pretty good having what I assumed to be some random good-looking girl following me. I requested to follow her back, and then I put my phone down to take notes in class. It wasn't until I got home that I got a DM from the girl. I don't really want to relay our whole conversation. I'll just tell you it started with her calling me very attractive, asking some basic questions about me, etc. I told her to accept my follow request, but she said she didn't want her boyfriend to see any new followers because he checks that all the time. That's when it got exciting for me. Having a girl show interest in me while she has a boyfriend. It might have been wrong of me, but I kept entertaining it. She said they kept fighting and she just needed a short break from hanging with him, that she wanted to hang out with someone else to detox. I texted my friend Joe asking his advice, and he said I should 100% go meet up with her. Just needed that justification from a buddy, of course. We made plans to meet up by the little Bayside beach in town at 11 p.m. The Bayside beach in town was the go-to spot for my friend group to hang out or just bring girls on little dates. I pulled up to the nearby parking lot around 10:50 and DM'd her that I was there 5 minutes later. She answered right away, saying, "Great, I left something in the sand for you." Odd. I said, "LOL, what?" She said, "Go look." It was bizarre that we were still DMing on Instagram at this point, but I went along with it. I walked over to the little quiet beach, and I saw something in the sand by the water. It was a little cardboard box. I went to open it, and it was a Polaroid picture of my car, parked in that little parking lot from just now. What the hell? I DM'd her, "LOL, where are you?" She replied, "Come find me." Okay, so she's messing with me or trying to be cute. I could tell based on the picture that she had taken it while hidden in the bush patch surrounding the perimeter of the parking lot. I referred to the picture to get the angle of where the picture was taken right, and I walked up to that general area in front of the bushes and stopped. I heard this really weird sound, like the sound you would make if you were trying to gargle but with no water in your mouth. "Tracy?" I said. I parted the bush to try and expose her. Instead, I saw some man hunched over on the dirt below the bush, his back to me. His head shot back at me so suddenly that I fell backwards on my palms, landing on the concrete. I ran to my car and drove out from there. I had to tell Joe and the rest of my friends what happened, and while they still used that beach as a hangout spot, I had to stop going there for a while for my own good. I'm 17 years old. My name is Jackie. Like most girls, I envy the gorgeous ones on Instagram. I like getting lots of likes and comments on my pictures. So last summer, I was taking advantage of the beach weather and posting a lot of swimsuit photos. Those are always a hit and get lots of attention. I usually let anyone follow me, as I like seeing my follower count grow. One day in the summer, I got one strange follow request though. I clicked on the username. It was completely blank. No profile picture, no posts, no followers, nothing. In fact, I'd be the only account it would be following once I hit accept. But I didn't care. Maybe it was one of my crazy exes trying to stalk me. Let them look, I figured. A week later, it began, and I received my first comment from the strange account. The comment said "hot" on one of my week-old pictures. I didn't think much of it, being as more than half the time I received comments on photos, they were from people I didn't actually know in real life. The next day, though, the account went on a liking spree on my profile. He liked nearly half of all my pictures. Then things got worse. One night I got a call on my cell phone. Curiously, I picked up and heard in a deep voice, "Hey," on the other end. It was a guy's voice, very, very deep, and I didn't recognize the voice at all. The voice on the other end said, "This is Jackie, right?" I hung up the phone with my heart now racing. I shut the blinds on both my windows. I had no idea who it was, but I just hoped someone was playing a prank on me. The next day, the account tagged me in a picture. I looked to see what the picture was, and it was a picture of the street around my block. I blocked the account and stopped using Instagram for a few days. One day that week, my friend Jess and I went to the beach. When we parked and were unloading the trunk with our beach chairs, some guy in jeans and sunglasses came up to me and complimented my swimsuit. I thanked him while not wanting to talk to this guy at all. He asked Jess and I how our day was going, and that's when I recognized his voice. He was the one on the phone who called me. He found me, and he followed me. I told Jess to get back in the car, and we drove home making sure he wasn't following us. I explained to her on the way back what was going on. I didn't want to leave my car in the parking lot of the beach, scared that he would bug my car or something. I also had my dad check for any trackers on the car when we got home. I'm I'm not sure how he found me, but I think he was wise to the fact that I knew it was him. However, just a few days ago, I received a DM on Instagram from some random account saying, "Remember that time we met at the beach? I'm hoping the harassment doesn't start again. I haven't been sleeping these past few nights. I may have to contact the police."